Salam everyone. My apologies that I haven't recorded this earlier. I've just been quite sick, and then my son has been quite sick, so I've just had an opportunity to do this for you guys. Thank you so much, Aziza, for inviting me to give this lecture to your class. And what I'm hoping is that I will record this lecture, and then once you guys had a time to watch it, if you have any questions, I'm happy for Aziza to bring them back to me, and then I can do another recording and send it to you guys. So first of all, who am I? My name is Sahar. I'm originally from Pakistan. I've been in New Zealand for 16 years now, and at the university I did a bachelor's in psychology, and then when I decided to do my postgraduate, I decided to do applied behavior analysis. So I'll talk about what is applied behavior analysis, but first, it's a 3-year degree at the University of Auckland. The first year is mostly around the theory of it. The second year is master's, so you choose a topic, you research on it, and you change someone's behavior, and that's where I met Aziza. And then the third year is an internship year, so where you are doing a placement. I did 2 placements. I did 1,500 hours over a whole year, and I worked with very young children up to adults, trying to change some of their behaviors. And then after I finished the third year, I was registered as a New Zealand psychologist, and then I sat an exam in May, and I passed it. And now I'm a board certified behavior analyst. So BCBA is short for board certified behavior analyst. That was my goal the whole time. It's an internationally recognized title, so I can practice it anywhere where they actually offer the position or recognize it. So what is ABA? Well, ABA is applied behavior analysis, and it's using science to change someone's behavior in a significant manner. How it came about? The founder of ABA, or behaviorism, is Skinner, Skinner, B.F. Skinner, if you wanted to Google him. So he started experimenting with rats and pigeons around, what if I do this? If I change something in the environment, how are they going to respond? And that was called the experimental analysis of behavior. He did quite a lot of research. They saw results, and then there came a phase where they thought, oh, it could be translated into the real world. So there was a lot of research, and that became the domain of a translational research of behavior. And they were translating what was happening with pigeons and stuff to kind of humans, and they were doing in labs. So you see where they'd call humans into the lab, something would be happening on the screens, and then they'll figure out their responses and stuff. And then the last field which came about was the applied behavior analysis. So how are we going to take what was happening in the experimental side and actually apply it into real world? And they found that they were making quite a lot of socially significant changes. So applied behavior analysis is quite fascinating to me. I am really passionate about it. Basically, we work with anything, any behavior that we can see. Yeah. So sitting is a behavior. Smoking is a behavior. It could be anything from neutral to something really good to something really bad. Yeah. So, for example, if someone comes to me and say they're using a lot of Facebook, to me that's again a behavior. You recognize that you want help with decreasing it. Yeah. So we'll work on a plan around how do we decrease this. Yeah. So what we do is we decrease a behavior, but then we need to increase something as well. So there's always, if we're decreasing something, we're increasing something as well. Yeah. So it has to balance out. If you're removing a skill or behavior from someone, you have to add a positive behavior or skill for that person. So it balances out. Applied behavior analyses have got 7 dimensions. So we look at everything that is applied. How is it going to help people? Me as a client, my parents, my smaller community, my extended family, and the wider community. So we look at how the change in my behavior is going to help other people. So we look at the client, and then we look at the rest of the client that we might have and how we might influence behavior change. As I said, behavior. So the second dimension of ABA is behavioral. So anything that we can see, anything that we can measure. And the reason is we're not saying that thinking, we still believe that thinking is a behavior, but we can't observe it. Yeah, I don't know what you're thinking unless you tell me. But if you're doing something, even if you say something else, but I can see what you're doing. So anything that I can observe is what I would measure. And then analyses, like we'd have to find out that if I change one thing in your environment, how will it affect your behavior? Yeah, and we always link it back to the theory of it. We never stray away from the theory of behavior analysis. So we always go back to behaviorism, the theory of it, the philosophy of it. And we always make sure that the procedures that we write or implement, if someone else was to read it, the program, they can implement it as well. So we keep things very simple. We don't complicate things. I don't give a very complicated explanation of why my client is doing this. I would look at their environment and I'll say, okay, if I tweak this in their environment, how is it going to change their behavior? So simple things first. And B, seek to change behavior that would be effective in the long run. So I'm not going to put in an intervention that would only work for a couple of months or only work when I am there. We want it to generalize. We want it to go to other settings. So for example, if I am teaching someone who is very shy to talk to people in the restaurant, I wouldn't just teach them, I wouldn't just intervene so they only talk to some people in the restaurant or just one restaurant. I would teach them so they can talk to people in this restaurant. If they go to another country and another restaurant, they still can use that skill. So it has to generalize to different settings. It can't just be one setting. Another example would be kids. If you're toilet training your kids, right? If I toilet train one kid in their home, I would want to make sure that they can also go to a toilet in a mall, a shopping mall, or they can go to a toilet in their school or a friend's place. So it has to go to different places as well. It can't just be in one place. So that's what we look at when we are designing a program, when we are meeting with the client. We make sure that all of these dimensions, 7 dimensions of ABA, are encompassed with it. Yeah. Now, there's quite a lot of books that, if you are interested in ABA, that you could read. One of my favorite books is this one. It's quite simple, but it explains quite a lot. So it's this one. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it says Behavior Analyses for Lasting Change. As I said, I can give this name to Aziza. It's a really good book. There's another one as well, but this one I find very, very helpful. If you've not done ABA before, you could still have a read and it will take you through a lot of the things. So one of my favorite books. So that's what ABA is about. To give you an example, let's say that if a client comes to me and say that they're using too much Facebook and they want to reduce it, yeah? So my first thing would be that I'm going to interview them and I'm going to ask them a lot of questions around what time do they use Facebook? Is it just before they're about to study? Or do they wake up in the morning and they want to use Facebook? Or is it when they're eating when they use Facebook? Because I want to figure out what situations would trigger them to use Facebook, yeah? And then I can manipulate them. So that's what I want to find out. The second thing that I would do to them is that, what is your goal? So some people would say, I'm happy to use Facebook because Facebook is good if used, moderately or for the right resources. I don't know, if you have a study group on Facebook, you might want to use it. So I'll ask them, what is your target? So do you want to use Facebook 5 times a day? 10 times a day? And we'll set up a target, and then we're going to start taking baseline data. So I'm going to say to them, okay, I'm going to give you this data sheet. It's going to have days and it's going to have times, and I want you to just count how many times you're on Facebook. So every time you pick up your phone and you go on Facebook, I want you to just put a tally mark next onto the data sheet. So you're going to take data for about a week if we have enough. I meet them in a week's time and I look at it and I say, so you're probably using Facebook 50 times a day now. Okay, so we'll start working on decreasing it slowly. So I'm not just going to go cold turkey and say, okay, from next week, you can only use Facebook 5 times. We might slowly decrease it. So we say, okay, next week, let's aim to use Facebook 40 times a day. And we'll put in a reward for them and say, okay, so if you've only used Facebook 40 times a day, and every time you use it, just tally it. At the end of the day, you get to do something that you really, really like. Yeah, so we reward them. But then I'll also be looking at some of the factors that are making them do Facebook. Yeah, so if they're saying that every time they're about to study and they use Facebook, we could put in an intervention and say to them, okay, so it looks as if you're avoiding to study. Yeah, so how about first you need to do 10 minutes of study, and then you could look at Facebook for, let's say, 2 minutes. Then you come back and study for another 10 minutes, then you look at Facebook for another 2 minutes. Yeah, so we're not saying that you don't do it, but we'll put in an intervention where they have to do something that they don't like first, followed by something that they do like. So that's another intervention that I could put in place. If we figure out that the bulk amount of Facebook they use is as soon as they get up in the morning, we could do something like, instead of having your phone around on your bedside table, have a book or have a puzzle, or put your phone in the next room. So basically, applied behavior analysis is, if we come across a problem, and if I am in for an observation, I look around my eyes, I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out, how can I change this person's environment so the behavior, the target behavior, the one that they want to increase or decrease, can actually increase or decrease. So how can I support them by tweaking their environment so they can reach the target goal, or whatever the goal is. I mostly work with kids with special needs, so they have either autism or global development delay, multiple disabilities. So there's quite a range of, and what we find is with those kids, sometimes they don't have language. So we work on, if a kid is he's crying and crying and crying, and the teacher is saying, every time I ask him to do this work, he cries. I don't know what to do. So I just, say to him, no, you can't cry, and I force him to do it, or I tell him to go outside and he stops crying. So I don't know how many of you, when you were in school, you were the kid, or you saw a kid that always, every time they didn't want to do some work, they would do something stupid, and the teacher would say, get out of the classroom, and they'll go out and they'd be happy. So if I am called into that situation, I look around and I think to myself, okay, so every time there's a hard task, very hard work for this kid, the teacher sends him out. He plays up, the teacher sends him out, kid is happy. So what is happening? So I look at the environment. I'm looking at what's happening before the behavior. So that's antecedent, A. What does the behavior look like? So the antecedent is a very hard task. Teacher gives the task to the student starts to throw things, swear at the teacher, or whatever it is. So that's the behavior. What is the consequences? The C. The C is the teacher tells the student to go out of the classroom, takes the worksheet away. And this keeps happening. So the pattern that I'm seeing is, kid thinks that the work is too hard, can't communicate with the teacher. Instead, the kid is screaming, throwing, swearing, and the teacher is telling the kid to just leave the classroom. So the kid has actually gotten what they wanted after all. The kid decides to leave the classroom. He doesn't, or she doesn't, have to do the worksheet anymore. So when I go into the classroom, I say to the teacher, hey, how about we make the work task a little bit easier? Yeah, because I think that the kid is really struggling. 2 things. Every time that you're looking at a behavior, does the person know how to do it? And does the person have motivation? Yeah, so do you have the skill? So imagine if you were given a task to do, and you don't want to do the task, but you're frustrated, you're crying. Ask yourself the question, is it because you don't know how to do it, or you don't have the motivation? So I'm looking at this, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so the kid doesn't know how to do it. It's hard. Yeah. So my first thing would be to say to the teacher, don't send the kid outside, because you're actually just rewarding this behavior, you're reinforcing it. And the kid has learned that, okay, as soon as something hard's come, I just have to scream, shout, my teacher is going to send me outside. What I say to the teacher is give them something easy first, not too easy, but not too hard as well. Give them the worksheet, and when they start to throw things, I am going to teach them to say, help me instead. Yeah. Now, the kids sometimes that we work with are not really verbal, so they don't usually speak. So we use sign language, or we use visuals, so cards that would say, help me. So we teach them to say this, yeah, instead of screaming. Now, we have realized, and research has realized, that every behavior, every negative behavior, every problem behavior is a form of communication. When you're angry with your parents, or when your children are angry with you and they bang a door, or they're banging the utensils, or they're screaming loudly, or they're crying loudly, it is about communication. When you have a really little child, you would know that. Really babies, yeah, because they can't talk. They cry quite a lot, and we're trying to figure out what it is. It's a way of communication. They want food, they want milk, they want hugs, they want cuddles, they're tired, they want to go to sleep, or they've pooed and they want you to change their nappy. So it's all about communication, yeah. So I find that the kids that I work with, just because they don't have the right language, they engage in a lot of problem behaviors. So my first thing is, what can I teach them as an alternative? What can they do instead of screaming and shouting and throwing things away? So in this case, I would say to the teacher, give them easy, start to slowly build it up, teach them how to do it. But I'm also teaching them to ask for help instead of throwing things, yeah? And we're going to ignore the screaming and the shouting. We're not going to reward it, we're not going to reinforce it. We're just going to keep saying, help me please, let me help you with this, this is how you do it. It's quite easy. So those are the type of things that we're looking at. So I'm just going to have some water. So remember the A's and the B's and the C's. But everything that we look at, the antecedents, what's happening before the behavior, what does it actually look like? Yeah, I don't want vague descriptions. I don't want things like, he was thinking. I don't know what that means. I can't see it. I want to know exactly what the behavior was. If you write that he was banging two of these together, that's behavior. I can see it. I can't see he was thinking. If he's not doing anything, you could say that he was just not doing anything. He was off task. I want to know what off task is. I want you to explain what the behavior looks like. Because remember, usually if I'm in a classroom, I want the behavior to be really well defined, because it's not just one teacher taking the data. There's a lot of teachers, yeah? And we really need that. So I'm just going to check on my son. He's sleeping in the other room. Yeah, he's still asleep. Sorry about that. So ABCs, remember ABCs, and the 7 dimensions. So always finding out what the behavior, how is it significant to people around them, what does it look like, how are we going to change the environment to make the biggest decision, and always going back to the roots of behaviorism. So we're always going back to the theory, the philosophy, making sure that it's effective, so it's long term, not just something when we are there. It generalizes to other places as well, and that it's if someone else was to replicate it, your procedure, they should be able to. So it's not just wishy-washy. Everything is very descriptive, everything is very concise, so other people could replicate it as well. So now we move on to what does a behavior analyst do. So before I was a behavior analyst, there are someone called behavior technicians. If you guys were interested in doing something like this, I think that your university, and I could have a chat with Aziza about this, is that we could link with someone in the States and see if we can kind of bring the course to you guys. And maybe just use Skype or recording and stuff to actually create an online course if there was an interest. But before behavior analysts, there are behavior technicians. So these are people that are supervised by a behavior analyst. So I could go to someone who would just implement it. So I now am responsible for doing the observations, writing the reports, writing the program. Once I've written the program, I can give it to a behavior technician, and I could supervise them to run the program. And then they do it, and then I see, okay, making a change or not making a change, yeah? But as a behavior analyst, there's quite a lot of us in the States, the United States, a lot of us, a lot in America, a lot in London, a few in Australia. In New Zealand, I think we've got around 20, 30, so very low in New Zealand. And obviously with being a behavior analyst comes a lot of responsibilities as well. We need to adhere to the ethics for behavior analysts. So there's a lot of things that we have to be careful about, because if you think about it, we are in a very tricky position, because we can see what's happening in your environment, and we could use science and systematically to switch on and off a behavior, to replace a behavior. So that is quite a powerful thing, yeah? And we want to be moral about it and ethical about it when we're doing a behavior change. Yeah, we want the best for the client, and whoever is close to the client. So for that, we need to adhere to the ethics for behavior analysts. So this is again a very important book. So Ethics for Behavior Analysts by Bailey and Birch. I don't know if it's coming out the right way, but again, I can send this to Aziza, and you guys could probably find it in a library. So the ethics, there's quite a few sections around. There's 4 sections, and it goes about the story about how behavior analyst came about. So again, that behaviorism, that Skinner did the experiments, then the translational research in between, and then came the behavior analyst. If you Google applied behavior analyses or behaviorism, you might see that there's mixed feelings about it, because as I said, it is quite a powerful science, because you're using the principles of science to tweak the behaviors, yeah? And people found that years ago, decades ago, people were using it, ones that were not even behavior analysts or didn't know how to use it correctly, were using it in a very wrong and harmful way, and they were actually harming people. In institutes, you know, back then a lot of the mentally disabled people were in institutes, and they were called retards. Now it's, you know, we've changed, we've come a very, very long way from that. So during institutionalization, a lot of people used behavior analyses in the wrong hands, didn't know anything about it, but they used a lot of punishing procedures on very, very vulnerable people, and it was not right. It's never okay. So that gave us as a field a very bad name, and it's still, people think that, you know, we are awful, that we use control over people, which is wrong. Yeah. If you read a lot of the Skinner's works, he's amazing, and he'll tell you that the whole philosophy is that we want a world that is more positive. You know, we want to remove the punishing aspect away from it. Punishing, for example, in school, you'll find that teachers are usually loud, they shout, always sometimes a bit angry. If you do something wrong, teachers are more likely to punish you than replace your behavior. So Skinner's philosophy around all of these things was that we need to change everything before using any sort of punishment procedure. We need to reinforce people's behavior. Now, if you know a little bit about applied behavior analysis, you'll know that we have reinforcement and we have punishment. Yeah. Now, we don't use punishment what other people use punishment as. Yeah. So for other people, punishment is that you're shouting at someone, or you're hitting someone, or, you know, you're doing a lot of crazy stuff to them. For us, reinforcement and punishment are opposite. So When we say reinforcement, it means increasing a behavior in the future. And when you means punishment, it means decreasing the probability of the behavior in the future. So reinforcement is just increasing, and punishment is just decreasing. It has nothing to do with you being aversive. Yeah. So anyway, so a lot of people that were not behavior analysts, not properly trained, were using a lot of punitive procedures with people that were really, really vulnerable. So we got a very bad name because of that. So the ethics covers quite a lot of what is our responsibility to our clients, yeah, and things like when you first meet a client, you need to make sure that medically everything is okay, yeah. So for example, let's say you get a client or you come across someone, or I get a referral for, and let's say that the parents are saying, this kid has been banging their head suddenly. They're just banging their head to the point where it's bleeding, and we just don't know. We think it's a tension, Every time mom comes into the room, the kid is banging their head, there's blood everywhere. My first question would be, has this ever happened before? No, it's just recent. I think it's for attention. I came across this when I was an intern, and this gentleman was just banging their head so much, and people were saying it was for attention. Well, the problem I finally figured out was that it was summer and he wasn't drinking enough water and he had a headache. Yeah. So our biggest responsibility to our clients before we put in any sort of intervention is to find out if everything is okay medically. Do they have a headache, toothache, urinary infection, anything that is causing them to change in the behavior? Because remember, again, if we work with a lot of vulnerable people who can't communicate. So if someone can't tell you what the problem is, they might show it in a different way. So self-harm or being aggressive towards someone. Worked with a kid who started suddenly biting everybody, and they were saying, we don't know what's happening. They got his teeth checked, and he had a lot of bad teeth. So his teeth has been removed now, and he's a much calmer kid. So the ethics and behavior analyst talks about that is when we get a referral, our first thought is, what medical variables could there be? Is the kid or the person sick? Headaches, as I said, are they a tummy ache? Are they sick? We have a lot of students that come to school very, very tired and very cranky. If you don't have sleep the night before, or if you don't have the 8 hours sleep, do you find that you're really tired? You have a headache, maybe you don't want to talk to people. So imagine if you're working with little kids and they haven't had a good sleep the night before. Mom is saying, come on, we have to go to school. They come to school, teachers are saying, no, you have to do this, no, do this. The kid blows off. They haven't had sleep, they're tired, they can't function, they can't focus, and then someone is saying to them, do this. There's too many demands, and that's it. They crash. They start hitting around, or they start crying, or they start running away. So our biggest thing is, again, looking at the environment, what's happening, yeah. And ethics of behavior analysts, very clear with that. As soon as you go and figure out how long has this been happening for, and then you observe. You're looking at things like, I always look at, how was the night before? Has something changed at home? Someone come for visiting, yeah. Has someone left? Has a brother gone overseas? Especially around, sometimes we find girls that are around 12, 13, their behaviors get really worse. It's because the hormonal changes, yeah. Maybe they have periods, and this is the first time they're having it. There's a lot of pain. They don't know what's happening. So a lot of these variables place all of the behaviors and the changes that we can't see, yeah. So we have to just rule them out. So that's one of the biggest things, is medical variables. When you're going in, don't be too confident that you're just going to fix it. Make sure that there's something that's happening that's not in your control, maybe, or maybe that's something a very simple fix. We try and talk about parsimony, PARSIMONI. It's one of the principles of science. The simplest explanation that you can find. Yeah, so if someone comes to me, as I said about the head banging, teacher says, oh, banging the head because every time I bring work, this kid thinks that it's too smart, I can outsmart me, so they start banging their head, and then they get so much attention that mom comes, takes them home, and they don't get to do any work. See, such a complicated explanation. I come in, I look at it and say, okay, maybe headache, maybe not drinking not enough water, maybe give them more water. Behavior changes gone within a couple of days. No more head banging. Very simple. What is the simplest explanation that you can find for that behavior? Parsimony. And then it talks about, so we have a lot of responsibilities to our clients, accepting accountability. So all the programs that are right, I have to take accountability for the changes, whether they're bad, whether they're good. If I am training the teachers and stuff, I have to be very thorough, because remember, I can't just be, it takes the first few weeks very intensive, and then slowly it can be less intensive. But the first few weeks, if I just give the program to the teachers without showing them how to do it, and if they mess it up, that's really bad. It's worse than not putting anything in. So if we put anything in, it has to be done to the point, very intensive. You can't leave it in the middle of it. And then things around, one of our code of ethics is that not accepting gifts. So people get really close to us, our families, our school, our teachers. Sometimes they like to give us gifts, but as a behavior analyst, I can't accept any gifts, because it's my profession. If I am, sometimes we do go to birthday parties or school trips and stuff as part of observation, because we want to see how the kid is acting and behaving in other situations. So we go as part of our profession, and that meshes the boundaries quite a lot, because if you're going with someone to a school trip, it's quite fun, so people think that you're not a professional at that point, and they might start to dual relationships, that someone might think you're their friend and a behavior analyst. So we just have to keep really clear boundaries around that. We can't accept gifts, so if someone is giving us wine, money, that sort of stuff, we say no, or chocolates and stuff. We say, look, very thank you, very thankful, but unfortunately can't accept it. I'm happy for you to share it with the kids, or but we can't take it. The reason is because once you start accepting gifts, people might expect favors in return, because that's what happens. You give someone a gift, you expect them to give you a gift back. So no gifts. It's a professional thing, and sometimes it's quite hard. We have to be really, we have to maintain confidentiality. That's one of our biggest things, because we work with very vulnerable populations. New Zealand is a small community. Even smaller is the community of behavior analysts, and the clients that we work with are quite vulnerable, and people know them because they've been kicked out from this school, that school. So families know each other, so confidentiality, we can't, if we see a client in a shopping mall, I can't say, hey, hi, how are you doing? We just kind of be nice, or kind of don't make eye contact and walk away. If a client's parents do approach and say, hey, how are you doing? And if I have my husband with me and he says, who was this? And I say, oh, just someone that I work with. I don't say that they're my client, and because it is about integrity, it's about their dignity. You don't single people out. The only time that I would break confidentiality is if I think that my client is a danger to themselves or to someone else, and then I would let the appropriate authorities know. If I find that there is some sort of abuse happening at home, I have to go and tell Child Protection Services here, or my supervisor. So these type of tricky situations, I'd have to step in and always speak out. You can't be silenced when you're working with vulnerable people. Maintaining records, so paperwork, that's quite a lot of it. I have to note down every meeting, every data that I've taken. We graph the data, we analyze it, discuss it with parents. So we do a lot of work. If I haven't taken data, I can't see what changes is happening yet. So to give you an example, I hope I can find. So yeah, so see, so once I've taken data sheet, that would be my baseline. Yeah, so this would be at the beginning of my intervention. Let's say that this was Facebook, so you're checking Facebook this much time. So this is one data point is for each day. Yeah, so we've taken data for a week here. Yeah, so I say, okay, this is how much you're using Facebook. Our goal is to be around here somewhere. Then we put in the intervention, and that could be that, okay, if you check Facebook this many times, then you can get a reward. And then I still ask them to take data because I want to know whether it's decreasing or not. Yeah, and then I remove the reward bit, and then you start using more Facebook. Then I put it in again, and it slows down. And then see, this is what I meant by maintenance. So I want it to be across months or even years, and not just for the time that I am there. So you'd say that why would I graph it? Well, two reasons. One, I can see if my intervention, what I've put in for them, is actually working or not. So every time I put it in, it works. Every time I remove it, behavior goes back up again. Second thing is for the client, so they can actually see they have progressed. Yeah, so they might still think that they're using Facebook quite a lot, but actually the data shows they have reduced it. So intervention is working. So we do a lot of graphs. We need to make things visual so we can see, everybody else can see. And it looks quite nice. I love graphs. So yeah, so we have a lot of paperwork. We discuss it with the clients. We make notes. And yeah, so as you can, there's quite a lot of, we can't, we only do interventions. So I keep talking about interventions, there's quite a lot, but we only do evidence-based interventions. So we do a lot of research, and I can't just use a random intervention that I've seen on a random newspaper article, or if someone is claiming on Facebook that candle therapy, for example, or if you light these many candles in your home every day, your son's behavior might decrease or your daughter might sleep better. No, we don't do that. Ours is evidence-based research. So what I mean by evidence-based is that it's been published in a journal article. A lot of people have looked over it. A lot of people have replicated it. A lot of people have published their replications, and the results have been really good or effective, at least, with the different numbers, different population. So we look at that research. So once someone has called me in, I look at their baselines. I see, okay, this is the behavior, this is what they want to change. What intervention can I put in? I go back, look into the research around. Has anybody done similar to this? Look into the research. Yes, it makes sense. I try that. If that doesn't work, I go back to research. I look again, and then I would try that intervention again. So it's trial and error, but always going back to the science. We only do evidence-based interventions. I also have an obligation if a parent is saying to me that they have another professional, not a behavior analyst, who wants to try this intervention and what do I think, I can give them resources and say, look, how about you go and read on this intervention and see if it is effective or not, and that's it. If a parent wants me to implement an intervention that another professional has given that I know is not evidence-based, I will just refuse and say, look, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do that. So that's ethical as well. That's part of our ethics, that we can't use interventions that are not scientifically validated. As I said, it's a whole science-driven process. Sorry, I just have another. It's just too much talking. So yeah, so as I said, a lot of ethics, but I think I've covered the main points. So big one, confidentiality, scientifically validated interventions, medical variables, looking at the simplest explanation, and not harming. If you find that all interventions that we put are ones that never ever harm our client. That's one of the biggest ethics. And dual relationships, so making sure our boundaries are really clear with our clients so they don't start to see us as a friend, because then if we do want to sit down with them and say, look, you need to work on this intervention and stuff, they might get really upset and say, oh, I thought you were my friend. So we have to keep that really, really clear with them. Yeah, I think that's it. It's 40 minutes now, and I'm pretty sure that you're tired of listening to me as well. As I said, if you guys want to know more, or if you have any questions, please let Aziza know. Even if you have any comments, it would be wonderful to know what you thought of it. Is there anything else that you'd like to know? As I said, I love ABA. I love behaviorism because I think it works. It works in real life. I use it in my real life. I use it sometimes for my baby. Not always, because sometimes I give and it's too easy. But I love it. I love working. It is a hard science. It's a hard field, like any human services field, any psychological, sociological field. It's hard, and people burn out easily. So you have to balance out between taking self-care for yourself and then looking after your clients. Because if you don't look after yourself, it would be really hard for you to do anything with your clients. But it's very, very rewarding. I remember the first time my client, I taught them to say their first word because they would never speak, and they were around 8 or 9, and they started speaking and they started having conversations, and the teacher said to me, it's magic, and the parents were so happy, and I actually felt really happy because I was making a change in someone's life. So it is hard at times, very, very hard, because we always working with problem behaviors, challenging behaviors. We usually called in when everything else has been trialed and nothing is working, then they call the behavior analyst in. So we're always there at the bottom of the cliff. Yeah. But there's our rewards, because we see little changes, sometimes drastic, sometimes over the years. But I feel really happy because I have meaning in my life, and it's gratitude. I am grateful that I chose this field, that I still love it, that I'm not just using it at work, I'm using it at home. I'm passionate about it. I love talking about it. I love reading about it. I love discussing about it. So if you guys want to know more, or if you were interested in me doing more lectures or someone else, you could definitely have a chat. It looks a bit weird because I'm just talking to myself and I can't see you guys. But yeah, thank you so much, Aziza, for letting me do this, and I'm so sorry that I didn't record this earlier. Please let me know if you have any comments, feedback, or any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Salam. Bye-bye.